My name is Julia. I am 26 years old. I live with my husband and his family in a small house. We all live together because his parents wanted it this way. I said yes because I thought they would love me like a daughter. I believed things would get better with time, but they never did. My husband's name is Brian. We got married last year. When we met, he was kind and always smiling. He said I was beautiful. He said he loved me. I believed him. We got married after 6 months. I was happy. I thought, this is the start of a good life. After the wedding, I moved into his family's house. I met his parents and his sister. His mother's name is Carol. She looked at me and smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. His father, Robert, only said, "Hello." His sister, Rachel, looked at me and walked away. I felt nervous, but I told myself, maybe they are just tired. Things will get better. The first few days were quiet. I cooked breakfast and helped clean the house. I tried to speak kindly to everyone. I asked Carol, "Can I help you with lunch?" She said, "No, I don't need help." But her voice was cold. I still stayed near the kitchen to see if she needed anything. At dinner, I placed food on the table. Carol looked at the food and said, "Brian likes his food this way, not like this." I said, "I'm sorry. I will learn." She didn't say anything. I looked at Brian, but he was looking at his phone. Every day, I tried. I washed clothes. I cleaned the rooms. I made tea. But they always found something wrong. One day Robert said, "You don't clean well. Look at the floor." I had already cleaned it that morning, but I said, "I will clean it again." Brian said nothing. On Sundays, they all sat in the living room and watched TV. I sat too, but no one talked to me. They laughed at jokes and stories. I didn't understand everything, but I smiled. No one looked at me. I felt like a stranger in my own house. One evening, Carol said to Brian, "You were smarter before marriage. Now you don't think." I heard her. I looked at Brian, but he said nothing. He just changed the topic. That night I asked him, "Why does your mother say such things?" He said, "She is just like that. Don't take it seriously." But it was hard not to feel hurt. One morning I made tea for everyone. I placed the cups on the table. Rachel picked her cup and said, "Too much sugar. Can't you do anything right?" I felt hot tears in my eyes, but I didn't cry. I said, "I'll fix it." Later that day, I went to our room and sat on the bed. I asked myself, why do they hate me? What did I do wrong? I was not lazy. I didn't speak badly. I worked every day. But still, they treated me like I didn't belong. When I called my mother, she said, "Come home, Julia. You don't need to stay there." But I said, "I can't leave Brian. Maybe his family will change. I must try a little more." Weeks passed. then months, but nothing changed. One evening we had guests. Carol told me to stay in the kitchen. She said, "We don't want noise." I said, "I can help serve food." She looked at me and said, "No need." I stayed in the kitchen. I heard them laugh. I heard them talk. No one asked for me. When the guests left, Carol came to the kitchen. She looked at the plates and said, "You didn't clean these fast enough. What were you doing all this time?" I said, "I thought I should wait until they left." She said, "You always think wrong." I stayed quiet. What could I say? Sometimes I asked Brian to go out with me. I said, "Let's take a walk. Let's go for coffee." He said, "Maybe later." But later never came. He sat with his father or watched TV with Rachel. I sat alone in our room. At night I could not sleep. I looked at the ceiling and thought about my life. I wanted love. I wanted a family. I wanted to feel safe. But now I felt small. I felt unwanted. I didn't tell Brian everything. I thought he knew. But maybe he didn't care. One morning Carol said, "You wear the same clothes every day. Don't you have better things to wear?" I said, "I wash and wear what I have." She said, "That's not how we do things here." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just walked to our room and closed the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked tired. My eyes looked empty. I used to laugh. I used to sing while cleaning. I used to dream. Now, I just wanted to survive each day without being hurt. Still, I stayed. I told myself, maybe next week will be better. I hoped for a smile, a kind word, a small thank you, but it never came. Every time I spoke, they looked bored. Every time I tried to help, they found fault. Every time I tried to be part of the family, they pushed me away. One afternoon, Carol had a small cut on her hand. I rushed to help. I said, "Let me get a bandage." She said, "I don't want your help. Go away." I stood there for a second, then walked away. My heart hurt. I went to the backyard and sat near the wall. I watched the sky. It was clear and blue, but inside me, it was cloudy and heavy. I closed my eyes and asked, "Why do they hate me?" I had no answer. Still, I went back inside. Still, I cooked dinner. Still, I cleaned the table. Still, I stayed. I kept waiting for a day when things would change. But deep in my heart, I started to feel something else. A small voice. It said, "You don't deserve this. You deserve peace." But I didn't listen. Not yet. I still loved Brian. Or maybe I loved the hope that things could be better. I didn't want to give up. Not yet. I am sharing my story, hoping they reach someone. Are you there? Are you listening? If so, let me know. Drop a hello or tell me where you're listening from. Just knowing you're here means everything. It was a rainy day. The house was quiet. I made breakfast and placed it on the table. No one said thank you. They just ate and left the table. I stood near the sink and watched the rain outside. The house felt colder than the weather. Brian walked into the kitchen. I smiled at him and said, "Did you sleep well?" He said, "Yes," and picked up his bag. "I'm late. I'll eat at work." I wanted to ask him to stay for 5 more minutes, but I didn't. I just said, "Take care." After he left, Carol walked in. She looked at the table and said, "You made this for him? He doesn't like this food." I said, "He used to like it." She said, "You don't know him well." Then she walked away. I cleaned the dishes slowly. My hands moved, but my mind was tired. Every day felt the same. I tried, but it was never enough. Later that day, I went to the small shop near our house. I needed bread and eggs. The shopkeeper, Mr. Harris, was kind. He said, "How are you today, Julia?" I smiled and said, "I'm okay." He looked at me and said, "You look tired." I said, "Yes, just a little." At least someone asked. When I came back, Rachel was sitting in the living room. She looked at the bag in my hand and said, "Did you take money from Mom?" I said, "No. I used my own." She looked away and said, "Good." I went to the kitchen and put the things away. Then I sat down at the table. I wanted to rest for a few minutes. Carol walked in and said, "Why are you sitting? There is still dust on the stairs." I got up and said, "I'll clean it." She followed me and said, "A real wife takes care of everything. My friend's daughter is not like you. She is smart. She is good." I kept my eyes on the floor and said nothing, but her words stayed in my mind all day. That evening, Brian came home late. I waited for him to eat together, but he said, "I already ate with my friend." I said, "You didn't tell me." He said, "It was not planned." Then he went to the living room. I sat at the table and ate alone. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to say how I felt, but he looked tired and cold. I was scared he would not listen. That night I cried in the bathroom. I didn't want anyone to hear me. I kept the water running so they couldn't hear my voice. I cried because I missed feeling loved. The next morning, I woke up early. I made tea and eggs. I cleaned the living room and swept the porch. But Carol still said, "You forgot the back room." I said, "I will do it now." She said, "Do it fast. We have guests in the evening." I got busy again. At lunch, Robert asked Carol, "Is lunch ready?" Carol said, "Ask your new daughter. She is here for something at least." I heard her from the kitchen. I felt small again. I didn't know why they hated me. I never spoke badly. I never fought. I never said no. That evening, their friends came to visit. I wore a clean dress and tied my hair. I helped in the kitchen. But when it was time to sit with the guests, Carol said, "You stay inside. We don't need help now." I stood behind the door and listened. One woman asked, "How is your daughter-in-law?" Carol laughed and said, "She's learning. Slowly. But she is not like us." They all laughed. I felt my chest tighten. I walked back to the room and sat on the bed. My hands were shaking. I wanted to leave. But where would I go? Later that night, Brian came to the room. I said, "They laughed at me. Your mother said I'm not like them." He said, "Don't take everything so seriously. That's how she talks." I said, "But it hurts." He said, "Just stop thinking too much." Then he turned off the light and went to sleep. I lay in bed, awake. I looked at the dark ceiling and whispered, "Why do they hate me?" No answer came. The next day, I tried to stay outside for a while. I swept the porch again and watered the small plants. I liked the quiet. The wind touched my face. It felt soft, like a hug. A few kids passed by and waved. I smiled and waved back. Then Rachel opened the door and said, "You have time to stand outside. The bathroom is not clean." I said, "I'll do it now." She said, "Don't act lazy. You're not a guest here." Her words cut deep. I walked inside and picked up the cleaning things. I started scrubbing the bathroom floor. My knees hurt and my back felt sore. But I kept working. If I stopped, they would say I didn't care. I told myself, they will see. One day, they will see how much I try. But part of me didn't believe that anymore. I thought of my wedding day. I wore a white dress. Brian held my hand. He smiled at me. I felt safe. I felt chosen. That day, I believed love would fix everything. But love alone was not enough. One night, I made Brian's favorite dish. I cooked it just the way he liked. I waited for him. When he came home, I said, "I made your favorite." He said, "I'm not hungry." I felt my chest go cold. I sat down and looked at the food. It smelled nice. It looked good. But it was just food on a plate now. No joy. No love. That night I didn't cry. I just felt empty. I started to wonder if Brian saw what was happening. Did he not care? Or did he choose not to see? One Sunday morning, I asked him, "Can we go out? Just for a walk?" He said, "I have things to do with Dad." I said, "Just for 30 minutes. He said, "Later." Later never came. I stayed home and folded clothes. Rachel passed by and said, "Still here?" I said, "Yes." She smiled in a cold way and said, "Brave girl." I didn't answer. That evening I looked in the mirror again. I touched my face. I said to myself, "You are not weak. You are not wrong. But even my own voice sounded unsure. I was still waiting, still hoping, still asking the same question. Why do they hate me? The days passed slowly. I woke up, worked, cleaned, cooked, and stayed quiet. Nothing changed. No one smiled at me. No one said thank you. I was there, but I felt like I did not exist. One morning, Carol and Robert were talking in the kitchen. I walked in to take a glass of water. They stopped talking. I smiled and said, "Good morning." Carol didn't answer. Robert said, "You don't need to smile all the time. It looks fake." I said nothing and walked away. Later that day, Brian came home early. I was happy. I said, "Let's go for a walk. The weather is nice." He said, "Not now. I have to help Dad fix something." I said, "You always say not now." He said, "Don't start again." I felt my chest hurt. I turned around and went to the kitchen. I cut vegetables slowly. My hands moved, but my mind was full of pain. That evening, I served dinner. Rachel looked at the food and said, "This again? You cook like a child." I said, "It's what we had at home." She laughed and said, "No wonder he married out of pity." I looked at Brian. He didn't say a word. I stood up and walked to our room. I closed the door and sat on the floor. I didn't cry. I was tired of crying. That night I asked Brian, "Do you love me?" He looked surprised. "Of course," he said. I asked, "Then why don't you say anything when they speak badly to me?" He said, "It's just how they are. Don't let it hurt you." But it did hurt. Every day. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "Stop. I am human. I have feelings." But I said nothing. I just turned away and slept without another word. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen. Carol was talking on the phone. She looked at me and said to the person on the call, "She's here. The girl who lives in my house and does nothing right." Then she laughed. I walked back to my room. I sat on the bed and looked at the window. The sky was blue, but I felt heavy. I heard a knock on the door. It was Rachel. She came in and said, "We are having guests again. Don't come out. You never know how to act." I asked, "Why do you hate me so much?" She looked at me and said, "Because you don't belong here." Then she left. Her words stayed in my heart. "You don't belong here." I repeated them again and again. I didn't understand why they felt I didn't belong. I cleaned the house that day like always. I cooked dinner like always. But I felt like a shadow. When Brian came home, I didn't say anything. I didn't ask him to go for a walk. I didn't tell him what Rachel said. I just stayed quiet. That weekend, Brian was away for a day. He had to go to a wedding in another town. I stayed behind. Carol looked at me and said, "You didn't go? No one wanted you there?" I said, "I stayed because you needed help at home." She laughed and said, "Don't act kind. You just wanted to stay away." That night, I ate dinner alone. No one joined me. The house was full of people, but I was alone. I walked to the backyard and sat near the old wooden fence. I looked up at the stars. They were far, but they were peaceful. I whispered, "I don't want this life. I want peace. I want kindness." I didn't know what to do. I didn't have money to leave. I didn't want to go back to my parents and say my marriage was not working. I didn't want to feel like I failed, but I also didn't want to feel like this every day. The next morning, I packed a small bag. I didn't take much. Just 2 sets of clothes, my phone, and some money I saved. I waited for Brian to come back. When he walked in, I said, "We need to talk." He sat down. I said, "I am not happy here. Your family hates me. They never speak to me with respect. You never say anything. I try every day, but nothing changes." He said, "You're just too sensitive." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm human. I want love. I want peace. But I get pain." He looked down. I said, "I need time. I will go to my friend's place for a few days." He said, "You're leaving me?" I said, "I'm leaving the pain. If you want this marriage to work, you must stand with me." He didn't say anything. I picked up my bag and walked out. At my friend's place, I felt safe. She gave me tea. She listened. She didn't ask too many questions. She just sat with me. That night, I slept well for the first time in many months. I didn't hear anyone laugh at me. I didn't hear anyone call me names. I didn't feel alone. The next day, I got a message from Brian. He said, "I miss you. I didn't know things were this bad. I want to talk." I didn't answer right away. He came to visit 2 days later. He looked tired. He said, "I'm sorry. I didn't protect you. I should have said something to them." I said, "Words are easy. What will you do?" He said, "I want us to live alone. Just you and me. I talked to my friend. He has a small flat for rent. I will take it." I looked at him and said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yes. I want to fix this." 1 week later, we moved. The flat was small but quiet. I cleaned it and made tea. Brian came home and said, "It feels nice here." I said, "It feels peaceful." He looked at me and said, "Thank you for not giving up." I smiled, but I knew it would take time to heal. The pain from before was still there, but now I had a small hope. No more cold looks, no more angry words, no more asking, "Why do they hate me?" Now I could ask something better. Will I be okay? And maybe this time the answer would be yes,